Insiders, welcome to Behind the Headlines. Tonight, I am pulling back the curtain on the royal family. I spoke to Andrew Lownie in depth last night, and I want to share with you what I found. I think you will be shocked, and I believe I have asked questions to Andrew that the mainstream media simply won't ask him. He sheds light on why he doesn't think Prince William will be the king that we deserve, why there is serious questions regarding the royal family's ties to the Middle East, and why we are still footing the bill for some of Andrew and Sarah's daughters' lives. Now, I was really surprised with what Andrew Lownie said. I did not expect him to be as forthcoming. And one of the things that I asked him about was Charles's and the royal family's alignment with what I believe is an Islamic ideology. And I see Charles pushing this a lot in the press and in his platforms. Now, this is something I spoke to Andrew Lownie about. And the reason I wanted to raise this was because it's a awkward question. No one wants to ask it. But I believe a lot of us are at home thinking, why is Charles pushing other faiths and forgetting that he is head of the Church of England? And what I'm saying is, it is fine to support other faiths, of course, but not at the detriment of Christianity, in my opinion. And I just, before we go into this, because the first part of the interview is on this, I want to find you a quote. And this is from Charles's Easter message this year. It says, right, get ready. So his message further went to embrace interfaith elements, noting that Jesus' example reflected the Jewish ethic of caring for the stranger, a deep human instinct echoed in Islam and other religious traditions and in the hearts of all who seek the good of others. Now, I just don't believe we would see the king of Dubai or the king of Saudi or the king of Abu Dhabi in his Eid message refer to Judaism and Christianity. And I think this is where the frustration comes from, because many of us are being told we can't call Christmas Christmas, it's holiday season, or we see the Home Office at Christmas not using a picture of the cross, but of an egg. And it's this watering down of Christian values. Now, there is the argument that Charles's role is ceremonial. To that, I would say we do not need someone turning up in a crown to hold a ceremony. We actually need our head of state to amplify our Christian values. So I want to share the first part of this interview, and then I'm going to come in and chat to you again before I share the second part. I hope you enjoy it, insiders. And please subscribe, comment, like, and make sure you've hit the notification bell. Right, let's go. To ask you a question that I don't think people will have asked you, because I feel like there's a feeling that it's an awkward question, but there is no denying that the royals, not just Andrew, we're talking about Charles and the Queen, the late Queen, have prioritized personal relationships with people in the Middle East and royalty in the Middle East and sheikhs in the Middle East. We're now in a position where Christian values on home turf do not seem to be protected in some people's opinion. How much have the royal family been involved in nurturing these relationships and potentially prioritizing Muslims over Christians, or the Muslim ideology, the Islamic ideology?
I don't think they put the Muslim ideology above the Christian one, but I mean, there's certainly very close links to the Middle East for lots of reasons. I mean, clearly in terms of arms sales and things like that, they've been used in terms of soft power just to promote British industry, particularly people like BAE. They're clearly very close relationships on a personal level because the Middle East like basically hereditary rulers. And there's plenty of money there, which of course attracts the royals. But I think you raise an interesting point, whether the values of the Middle East are beginning to shape the views of the royal family to the detriment of, let's say, the role as Supreme Governor of the Church of England. So it's definitely worth investigating. I mean, the royals like going to the Middle East because they're treated very well, often given gifts. They live in a very lavish way. And that's particularly true, I found, of the Yorks. Often there, they're very keen on Formula One, which is, of course, very big in the Middle East. So it's a very interesting area to explore. I mean, there have been some articles done on this by a magazine called Declassified, but it's certainly worth the mainstream media perhaps beginning to look at this. I mean, certainly what seems to have happened is Andrew has passed on all his contacts to his daughters in the Middle East, and they are clearly very active there. We saw Beatrice promoting a Saudi bank the other day. We had the Queen, of course. Easiest way to her heart was to sponsor the Windsor Horse Show. And a lot of that clearly, she's very supportive of one of the Middle Eastern royals who had perhaps not treated his wife and indeed his daughter very well. So I think they certainly turn a blind eye when they feel that maybe in terms of realpolitik, they need to keep in with these people.
Yeah, it feels it's very difficult because obviously the late Queen is not here anymore. And so we are hearing so many things come to light, especially through you. And it feels very different from the construct that we were presented by the palace. But perhaps times have changed because the late Queen was still very close with the ruler of Dubai, for example. And there are shocking allegations that have come out of Dubai for decades. Do you think what has changed is that many of us may have woken up to things not being as they seem?
Well, I mean, we know that MBS, basically lured a critical journalist into the embassy and hacked him to death. I mean, cut him up. And Fergie and Andrew were very happy to continue associating with him afterwards. It kind of puts Epstein slightly in the shade. And I think, the royal family do turn a blind eye to some of the abuses in the Middle East. They'll argue that it's a different culture or something. But I agree, it's slightly hypocritical to be supporting certain views of the world and tolerance, and then to be sort of in bed with some of these people. And I think one of the things that worries me is we have no idea of the sort of level of contact between them. They often go in on private jets where they're staying. I mean, the rumors now that Andrew will go to somewhere like Abu Dhabi, but also the gifts they're given. There is a royal register of gifts, but I'm told by those who know something about it that not all gifts are declared. They will often put one gift when they were 5, or just not mentioned at all. And indeed, often we discover about trips in the Middle East only through the gift register. It hasn't been on the court circular. So again, it's coming back to this question of how secretive the royal family are. I mean, they do depend on the support and trust of the people. And if we feel that they're up to nefarious activities in the Middle East with these people, and we're being taken for a ride and we're supporting them, then that's not very good, and it's not going to encourage us to support them in the future.
Yeah, I mean, it's the king or the ruler of Abu Dhabi that has offered Andrew his palace. And this story has been going around, forever. But it was only in 2020 that honor killings were decriminalized. Or sorry, not decriminalized. The legislation in that dropped. But up until that point, our royal family were parading the Arab royal family in plain view of all of us, and what was happening to women in those countries was absolutely shocking. And I would argue that our mainstream media have played the game too far with the royals, because this has not been reported and investigated until now, when people are cottoning on to it.
Well, to be fair to the royal family, they're often directed by the government, and they have to cozy up to lots of people they prefer not to cozy up to. So I think it's their own choice, And there is also this view that you have to respect and tolerate other cultures, even though you may not subscribe to their views, however extreme they seem. So I think I would give the royal family a pass there myself. There's clearly a close association with the Middle East. It's not always, shall we say, a very transparent one, and I suspect there are things happening that people would feel unhappy about. But in terms of the way the royal family are deployed in the Middle East, because of its significance, whether it's oil or arms or whatever, I suspect that we can't really lay the blame at the feet of the royal family. So, I'm going to give them a pass on that one.
Okay, and now the Queen. How much did she know, Andrew? Because what's come out feels vastly different to the construct that we've been presented by the palace and by the mainstream media.
Yeah, well, certainly the research I found was that, the Queen, rather than putting the monarchy first and her family second, had, certainly in the case of Andrew, put her son first, rather like Lady Thatcher did with Mark. It's interesting, the front page of the Sunday Times today is kind of throwing the Queen under the bus. The idea that somehow she let all this happen and Charles has got to clear up the mess. And Tom Sykes has an interesting piece where he says, well, I'm not sure this is right, because Charles is very much involved in dealing with Andrew over many years. And so you can't just blame the Queen. But it's certainly clear from my research that Andrew was protected, he was enabled to do all the things he did because of support from a wide variety of people, whether they're politicians or diplomats or people at UKTI. And the palace was one of those enablers, that they turned a blind eye to what he was doing. They often supported some of his initiatives. They entertained some of these dodgy dictators who they had no reason to entertain, except that they were being nice to Andrew. So there are lots of questions which could be asked, and I hope will be asked. I welcome the fact that there's likely to be more parliamentary scrutiny, for example, of the royal family, that they're no longer, well, we haven't seen this, but I hope they will no longer be given the exemptions they have under the Freedom of Information Act, that we will have a royal register, that we will see royal wills unsealed, because I think that would create a little bit more transparency and accountability, and I think reassure people that they didn't have their noses in the trough and were taking the electorate for a ride.
It would seem to me, though, that the royal corruption is still actually ongoing because of the ways in which you have been blocked from accessing information during your investigation. That would seem to me that they are still covering for Andrew.
Well, they have been, I think everything changed last weekend, and you're absolutely right. They have made my research very difficult. The Foreign Office told the ambassadors not to talk to me. I have had no access to the papers of Andrew as a trade envoy, which should be now publicly available in the National Archives. So, there have been attempts to shut me down or not to give me any information. And we know, of course, the palace refused to let Amy Robach and ABC run their piece about Andrew, Jeffrey and Epstein many years before the story broke. Threatening to not give them access to the royal family for interviews. So there has been an attempt to shut the story down. I'm hoping now they realize the seriousness of the situation and that they are losing the confidence of the nation, that they will take slightly more drastic action and they will be slightly more open. I don't think they're going to go all the way. They're still very secretive about their finances, the way they pass on wealth, about many of their records, but I think we've shifted the dial a bit. A series of things, partly my book, partly a more emboldened press, the leaks of the emails, the Daily Telegraph piece about the Chinese spies, Virginia Giuffre's own memoir, the threat of what may come with the Senate Oversight Committee. So we are moving a bit, but clearly not enough, I suspect, for public opinion, and not enough, I think, to satisfy the demands of a nation which is meant to be democratic.
The Foreign Office, it was them that said it was too expensive for them to collect the information that you requested.
Yes, I mean, I put requests in both to the Department of Trade and Industry and to the Foreign Office, who had the sort of joint responsibility for Andrew as a trade envoy. And they both basically put up the same arguments that they've got so much material that I need to refine my request. But when I do refine the request, and I do it in a pretty calculated and systematic way, they then say they've got nothing. So even if you cut up all the different elements, egrams, telegrams, written communications, whatever it is, and travel and accommodation or final briefings or whatever, they still say they've got nothing. So it's like whack-a-mole. They often deploy exemptions, whether it's data protection, national security, international relations, the royal exemption 37. So they're looking for every possible reason not to give you these documents. And that does raise a lot of questions. Why not? Is it because of who was on these trips? They want to keep it secret. Is it because of who he saw and what business he did? I had one document sent to me which did have a list of the people on the trip, and every single name was redacted apart from Andrew, even though the court circular will actually give you many of the names on that list already. So this is just deliberately obfuscation and evasiveness, and it doesn't speak well to what must have been happening.
This also indicates that the rot and the cover-up and the deception and the weaponization of power runs incredibly deep. And this is very, very concerning, because it means that William is going to have to do something so drastic like we've never seen before if the monarchy is to continue and survive and thrive.
Well, I mean, I don't have great hope of William, I'm afraid, on issues of transparency. I think he's going to reform the monarchy. It's going to be a slimmed down monarchy with, I suspect, the titles taken away from anyone who isn't in the direct line of succession. And it will all be touchy-feely and all about pastoral rather than pomp. But I don't think he's going to surrender to transparency. He's given every indication so far that he doesn't believe in freedom of information, that he believes that his finances are his business and no one else's. But given this money in the Duchy of Lancaster and Duchess of Cornwall is actually public money, which should have been surrendered years ago, I mean, the whole thing has been a fudge in terms of George Osborne giving them a pretty large sovereign grant each year. But you've got to remember that politicians have this power, and then politicians, of course, get ennobled. And it's a very cozy relationship. I mean, it should be much more arm's length, the whole thing. So, the Chancellor has a great deal of power, and they tend to be kind of kowtowed by the royal establishment in order to give them exactly what they want, which is large sums of money and no proper scrutiny of what it is.
When you said that William hasn't been or hasn't shown signs of, wanting to engage in freedom of information and transparency, what leads you to think that? Because I've put my hope in William reforming things, but I also, without question, trust what you say, because your investigations are second to none.
Well, I think he will do, as I say, some things which look good, which look like they're modernizing the monarchy and getting rid of some corruption. I mean, all these hangers-on who are clearly abusing their position as royals and we're paying for. I mean, we're paying for Beatrice and Eugenie to have apartments at St James's Palace and Kensington Palace. We don't know whether that's a market rate or not, and on what basis they should have that accommodation given they're not working royals. So I'm hoping that those sort of things he will be addressing. But I think in terms of, for example, the wealth of the Duchy of Cornwall, which he controls, and the Duchy of Lancaster, which he will eventually control, that we're not really going to get the sort of openness that I think a modern democracy would expect.
How wealthy are the royal family?
Well, that's the question. We just don't know. And it's, of course, very difficult to measure. They're clearly assets that are owned by the nation and not owned by them, but it's difficult to again establish where the split is. There are gifts that they've been given. Are those gifts to the nation or gifts to them? There are all the investments they have. The problem is we don't know the wealth that's passed from generation to generation because all the wills are sealed, I mean, even the very minor wills. So where, for an ordinary person, every other person's wills are open. And so, of course, people have ways of hiding things through trusts, as indeed do the royals. I mean, lots of trusts offshore and things. But they would at least give a little bit of insight into the extent of their wealth and how it's passed on. But
there we go. All right, here we go. So I'm not sure how you found that. I was very surprised at what Andrew said about Prince William. And because I'd really put my hope in the fact that he would be able at the right time to straighten things out. But the more and more you research, the more you realize that if you are to straighten out what is wrong, the corruption runs so deep. It's not just the royal family, it's the government, it's the Met Police, it's everyone that is in a position of power. And so this makes it very, very complex. Now, I've made a few notes here. So, Andrew Lownie said about the Queen being thrown under the bus, the late Queen, by Charles's team, he believes. And that was regarding a piece that ended up in the Sunday Times. Now, this is very common because what you see with the royal households is each team is briefing against each other. And this is where I believe it's critical that people understand what's going on, because there are so many stories flying around. And whilst, yes, they're not all positive, they also do thrive on bad press because there is intrigue. People are interested in them. And this is what Harry said long ago, but about, teams briefing against him and Meghan. But this is part and parcel of being within the royal family. And you'll remember when Catherine first met William, there was lots of stories calling her weighty Katie, and the press were quite cruel to her. But it always comes round full circle. You will never see the mainstream media be positive about all members of the royal family at the same time, unless the head of state were to pass away, and then there would be a cooling period whereby they couldn't really attack anyone. So I'm going to give you the next part now. Get ready.
for the security on their year off, where there was no threat to their lives. So, I mean, I think security is a big issue that they need to be open about, and that is from taxpayers' money. The duchy accounts are a slightly more complex thing. I think there still should be open to scrutiny, but that is money that was sort of given by the public a long time ago, and they clearly reinvested. I think just the way that their wealth is passed on, is important that we know how that is done. And if they're tax dodgers, for example. I mean, we saw with the sale of Sunninghill that was something slightly mysterious about that. We've seen the lease that was given to Andrew at Royal Lodge, not offered on the wider market, basically a cozy arrangement with him. We saw the fact that some of the details were redacted, even though the lease should be available at the land registry. So these are the sort of questions that I hope will be addressed. And William will do some and he won't do others. And I think all we can do is keep the pressure on him. I mean, it's an encouraging sign that Patricia Hodge, Public Accounts Committee, and others are beginning to question this. There's never really been any parliamentary scrutiny of the royals in the past. And this can only be a good thing.
But do we think it could be performative when we see the very same MPs that are calling for an investigation for Andrew are some of the same MPs that have ultimately enabled the grooming gang inquiry to not progress, and they have gone out of their way to object and hold that back? So it feels to me like a distraction.
Well, there's a lot of inconsistency about position that MPs hold, which we all know, and they all have different reasons for doing different things. I think the pressure has been put on parliamentarians by the constituents to be slightly more for more oversight of the royals. That's coming from, and there isn't the same pressure perhaps on the grooming gangs. Who knows? I mean, there are people. One of the fiercest critics of the royals, even when he was in government last time, was Chris Bryant, who's the Minister for Europe. But actually now he's not answered any of my emails, and he certainly kept very quiet. So he was a very articulate critic and brave critic of the royals, and for some reason he's been tamed in that 20 years. And it doesn't want to raise its head above the parapet. So that's sad. But I think we have an interesting development. We have Robert Jenrick, Conservative MP, traditionally very defensive of the royal family, who's saying that Andrew basically is a horrible person and he needs to be held to account. We have clearly some MPs, particularly Labour MPs, beginning to call for inquiries. So things are changing, but it needs a little bit more of a push, I think, before anything really happens.
And do you feel that the recent news regarding the now retired police officer that Andrew asked to do some digging on Virginia Giuffre, do you feel that anything will happen with this if we look back at the track record of how the Met have not been transparent and how the Royal Protection Officers and police have evidently not done their job?
Well, I mean, the Met claim they're investigating it. I mean, they claim they did that before and nothing happened. But I think with public pressure, they're taking this more seriously. As far as I understand, there are two versions of the PPO: that he has been interviewed, that he can't remember exactly what he did, which is, of course, slightly suspicious, and the thing has been shut down. The thing I've heard from actually a former serving police officer is that he did indeed follow the instructions. He didn't report it as he should have done, and basically did his master's bidding. And we have to remember that though ostensibly the PPOs report to the Royalty Protection Squad and then ultimately to the Met Commissioner, they in effect really just do the bidding of their principal, the whoever royal they're representing, and so they call the shots, the royals. And so I think it is very likely that he did contact contacts in the FBI, which he would have had, and an investigation was done into Giuffre. We know that Andrew has tried to smear Giuffre in the past using Mark Gallagher and other means, so his PR guy. So I suspect the second interpretation is the more likely one. And that's, of course, a criminal offence. The PPO is not going to basically incriminate himself, so I can understand why he's given the explanation he has. But there must be evidence, for example, of anything that was reported to a senior officer. If it wasn't reported, there must be evidence that this was followed up with the FBI or other law enforcement agencies. And so I think it's not that difficult to investigate and to find out what went on. And if the law was broken, then I'm afraid the PPO and indeed Andrew should be investigated and charges should be brought.
You mentioned that with public pressure, that is why you believe the Met are investigating this. But I think that just reiterates how broken the entire system is, from the palace to the police, because it actually should be irrelevant whether there's public pressure or not. A crime is a crime, and it should be investigated.
Yeah, no, of course, absolutely right. And I mean, poor people are going to prison for tweeting, stuff that they shouldn't, and pretty minor just misdemeanors. And the Met should be pursuing everything without fear or favor. But, of course, that's not the reality. No one has actually prosecuted a member of the royal family for a serious charge before. It's unknown territory. It's frightening. There's a lot of pressure the royals can bring on the Met and indeed on lawyers. So we remember how the Burrell's trial was stopped when the Queen conveniently remembered that Burrell had spoken to her. The royals are worried about embarrassing information coming out, quite apart from the fact that there is the king's brother possibly on trial for quite a serious offence. For example, misconduct in public office carries a life imprisonment. So, they will be looking for every way they can try and shut down this story without basically offending public opinion. And I just hope that there are some independent-minded souls in the CPS, in the police, and elsewhere who are prepared to move ahead if charges are justified, which I think they are from the evidence I've gathered, and take the view that no one is above the law, including Prince Andrew.
I think the difficulty comes as well when, you see Sadiq Khan knighted, Keir Starmer knighted, and it often feels that the king's honours are a protection web sent to, those that are in power, and then, let's throw in a normal person so it looks like normal people have a chance. But for me, I believe that the way the king's honours are done, it echoes actually Jeffrey Epstein's Black Book. It is a networking exercise. What do you think regarding that?
Well, the royals certainly operate through patronage and pressure, and if you do their bidding, there are lots of baubles they can give you, particularly their own Victorian order. I think it is extraordinary that they have the power to suggest honours, because there should be an independent honours committee, but clearly it's very deferential. And so we see a lot of businessmen, for example, who've given money to Dumfries House find themselves ennobled or rewarded in some way. And the two should be very separate. And I think that should be true of parliamentarians as well. People can nominate people, but there should be a much more independent scrutiny. And this idea of, resignation honours and prime ministers just rewarding their friends is outrageous. But we have to work within the system that we have, unfortunately. But yeah, I know the whole thing is deeply corrupt. And it's not in the politicians' interest to reform it, because they rely on that patronage. Pressure, okay, can clearly be brought to. They can make life difficult. I mean, I've suffered from this myself. And it's put a lot of people off speaking out. And if you think that people may be subject to pensions, may have grace and favour homes, there are lots of ways that pressure can be put. I have a friend who spoke out, a diplomat who spoke out against Andrew. He lost his security clearance mysteriously, and then lost his post-diplomatic job as a result of that. And it's always very difficult to prove what had happened. They have lots of levers they can pull, and of course they do pull them. I mean, this is a very ruthless operation.
So, insiders, there we go. Bring myself to the stage. There we go. Interested to hear what you all think of it. It's just made me want to fight for transparency more. And I've always almost ring-fenced criticism for the Queen, the late Queen, and also William, because I feel like Prince William, he hasn't even got started yet. So I kind of circle him off because I don't feel like he's done anything wrong. With the late Queen, I've always grown up, not that she was a grandmother to me, but it's respect your elders. And so it feels deeply uncomfortable for me to criticize her now. But and there will be things you might not like that I say, or there might be things that Andrew Lownie says that you don't like. But I have found that the gifts that the royals and the late Queen were receiving, and the numerous trips to the Middle East where the human rights laws are, I would argue, non-existent. It feels very uncomfortable to me that we've seen them do this for years and years and years. So I just want to add this to the stage. This is when Princess Beatrice appeared in a promo for UAE Bank's new Mayfair branch. And then we've also got here, this is the late Queen with Mohammed. Well, it's His Highness Sheikh Mohammed bin Rashid Al Maktoum. He is the ruler of Dubai. And I'd love to hear. If you want me to do an episode on him, I absolutely will. I followed this story really closely, and it's very, very concerning. So there are lots and lots of deep ties. And I just want to read you something, because obviously we know that Beatrice and Andrew, Sarah, they've done lots in Saudi. So I went on to Amnesty International, and these are the 10 ways that Saudi Arabia are currently violating its citizens' human rights. So executions are on the increase, women are widely discriminated against, unfair trials and torture during detention, migrant workers are treated poorly, there's a crackdown on free media and press, there is no free speech, there are no gay rights, there are travel bans. People are not allowed. Some people are not allowed to leave the country. There are forced evictions, no protests. And so this is what makes me feel uncomfortable, that the royal family will say, well, we were deployed there from the government. And then the government will say, oh, they went there to do work for us, blah, blah, blah. But then we never get any accountability. And so I think it's deeply unsettling how close our royal family are to leaders in the Middle East, whereby women and children are not protected and haven't been for a very long time. If anything, now we are having this conversation, they have more rights than they have before. But drop me a message. Let me know what you thought of Andrew Lownie's interview. And there's more to come where that came from. The rest will be coming out this week. And 36 minutes this episode. Sorry, Buddy. I ended up talking a bit much. Now, if you don't know who Buddy is, Buddy's a very funny troll. And I made a joke about this because he said I talked too much and just to get on with it. But a lot of what I'm doing is framing things and positioning it to you. And so I thought, God forbid I set up a YouTube and wanted to talk. And one of the insiders said, Buddy, it's not TikTok. And I thought, yeah, it's not TikTok, Buddy. So I will talk, and I will talk freely, because some of the information I will present to you, it won't be new information, but the way I aggregate information is wildly different from how I believe any other YouTuber aggregates it, but also how mainstream media have positioned it to you for years. There is a YouTuber called Ian Carroll who I don't actually agree with Ian Carroll, but what I like about him is when he started, it was the way he aggregated information in a way that there were no censors, there was no spin. So that is what I'm looking to do. And I would love to hear from you. There are some areas that I'm going down the rabbit hole on. I think Freemasonry is really important to discuss. The Met are allegedly saying that people within the force need to say whether they are in the Freemasons or not. We know the royal family have deep ties to Freemasonry, but I'm not just going to talk about the royals. So if there's other things you want me to talk about, let me know. And here you go. This is a little snazzy banner I made. So if you are able to subscribe and hit the notification bell, I would be most grateful. This week, I will be on the Vintage Read show. I am so excited. It's a pre-record, and then I will be on Dan Wootton's show on Thursday as well. And next week, I will be covering court for Urban Scoop to see if Tommy Robinson will or will not be able to walk out a free man. So lots coming up, and I'll bring you the inside scoop.